Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is time for the LEC Power Rankings out of Europe for Week 8 action. And the theme in Europe throughout, I'm going to say the last 5 weeks have been the same bottom 3 teams, but it is absolutely finally time that we separate these teams into different tiers. And there is a little bit of shakeup in that very bottom half because when we look at 10 to 6, Vitality are back in that bottom spot. They didn't go head-to-head against SK, but it feels disrespectful to put SK in that number 10 spot. And yes, there's not much inspiring play coming out of them in either of their matches again this week, but Vitality, when they're starting Selfie and when they're starting Jack Troll, they look so much worse than they have in the middle of the split when it was Steel back. Even when they had Seiken, it was looking better for them. They were at least competitive or more competitive in a lot of these matches. The head-to-head against Schalke, you saw, okay, well, Schalke is clearly a tier above them, and that is what I'm talking about when we break these into tiers, because Schalke should no longer be associated with the bottom 3 in Europe. They should just be a distant outside playoff squad. I would put them more so in the category with Excel now than Vitality and SK. Put them in a league of their own. Put them at the bottom of the barrel for LEC games and teams, because Schalke, their first 2-0 of the entire split, and they've looked better. They have wins against actually good teams. SK and Vitality, you can't say that. They haven't done that. They haven't shown that all split long, really. And Excel falls off a little bit, so they're still that outside playoff team. They're not going to make it this year. They're just a little bit short of the top 6 of that competition, of that level of play. But if you're breaking up again into tiers, and that's what we're going to go through. I'm into that theme for the LEC. So bottom F tier, you want to call it, SK and Vitality. The C tier, a little bit above that, is Schalke and Excel. And as you get into that B tier, that's where you start talking about Misfits, who we have in at number 6 as the lowest they've been in quite a while. Remember, Misfits were as highly ranked as number 2 on our power rankings at the peak of that 7-game win streak that we saw out of them. But another 0-2 weekend, and they did drop that game to Schalke, which was part of their 2-0 weekend, and that's why Misfits moved down. They had an 0-2 weekend, that head-to-head, that so important head-to-head against Mad Lions. MAD coming away with it. Nobody calls them MAD, and now I know why. It sounds completely ridiculous. But Misfits 9-7 now. They dropped a couple of games, so they're the bottom of the barrel when it comes to those playoff teams. And I'm still excited to see all these rookies kind of perform in the European playoffs, but they're kind of slumping their way in, not what you want. Maybe they peaked a little bit too early, but it was Mad Lions who got the better of that head-to-head, and they start off the top 5 for this week. They climb back in there. They've been there a couple of times throughout the spring split, and even though they have a better record than Rogue, they're still slotted a spot behind them. We're given a little bit of leeway for Rogue because they did have the G2 Fnatic death match of a weekend that they had to go through. So it's about as forgiving as you can be for an 0-2 weekend. And no, Rogue never really had a chance or were sitting in the driver's seat for either of their matches against the 2 best teams in Europe, but still feel like if playoffs started right now, I would favor Rogue over Mad Lions in a best of series, and even in a head-to-head best of 1, I would favor Rogue, have more confidence in them. So even though they have a win less than the Mad Lions, still have them in that number 4 spot ahead of them. And again, if we're talking tiers, above Schalke and Excel, the next tier has got to be those bottom 4 or those bottom 3 playoff teams in Rogue, Mad Lions, and Misfits. With Rogue at the top of them, maybe you throw Origin in there, but I think Origin is actually its own tier. So we're calling the B tier. We're calling Misfits, Rogue, and Mad Lions. And then you get to the A tier, and it's probably just Origin alone. In that 3rd spot, they have the same record as Fnatic at 12-4. They were fine this week. I mean, they had the easiest schedule of probably, no, definitely any team in the league. SK and Vitality, the clear F tier teams. And there was really never any doubt. Sure, there was a little bit of early game blunders, I would say, from Origin, but for the most part, you had the utmost confidence that they were going to come away with a W in both of their matches, and they've really done nothing wrong so far this split. They're absolutely clearly that third contender, and you would even put them, as I said, they're in their own category. They're a little bit better than Rogue, Misfits, Mad Lions. They're in that A tier. They're better than that bunch, but they're not as good as the top two, the Titans of Europe. But hey, there could still be a very deep playoff run in the future for OG and the boys. I definitely think this roster is much better than anything we'll have seen out of 2019 Origin. The top two are the final tier, the S tier, the A+ tier, whatever you want to call it. I think Fnatic and G2 are still close enough that you can talk about them in that same category, in that same tier of competition. You saw it when they went head-to-head. Fnatic had the early game, bit of a misplay. G2 comes back. A best of 5, I think, is absolutely still going the distance between these two squads. They're still a cut above the rest of the competition in Europe, but the gap has definitely closed a lot from what we saw towards the end of 2019 summer, but they're still there alone. G2 has the edge and is almost a clear path for that first seed with the head-to-head 2-0 over Fnatic. They basically need to win, not basically, they need to win a game. They need to go 1-1 this week to lock up first place. If they go 0-2, Fnatic goes 2-0, you know the hoopla. But G2, because they still have that head-to-head, are that number 1 spot, and we saw them picking some fun stuff last week. It looked like peak G2 against two up-and-coming, younger, talented teams trying to show something, and G2 just absolutely slammed them into the mud. They are still the kings of Europe for a reason, and maybe it hasn't been as dominant as we've seen from splits past out of them, but let's be real here, folks. They're still 13-3 coming into the playoffs. They could go 15-3 and still have one of their probably their best regular season performance. I think the same as what we saw in spring 2019. G2 and Fnatic, I want some best of 5s against those two squads in the playoffs. They're the clear 2 top dogs in Europe, and it'll probably remain true throughout the playoff run.